Welcome to the iPad Podcast, a weekly podcast from MacsFuture.
Okay, welcome to episode 90 of the iPad Podcast. This is Lex at MacsFuture.com. Hey, and today is February 19th, 2012, and we have a lot of iPad news, iPad-related stuff. Boy, it's been an interesting week. And remember, this is a chit-chat-free podcast about everything about the iPad. So any support in the iTunes store, positive reviews would be greatly appreciated. Also, check out the video version of this podcast on YouTube or Blip TV, also on the MacsFuture.com website or on Google Plus under MacsFuture. All right, thanks for listening. Let's get to it. Okay, so we're getting closer to the launch of the iPad 3, and there's been all sorts of stories where stories about like parts of the future iPad 3 being leaked, and the website MacRumors.com published a series of posts showing different leaks of pictures of parts of the purported iPad 3. Now, the first story, and I have a link to it on the show notes for this podcast, is a post entitled "Confirmed iPad 3 has a 2048 times 1536 Retina display," and this came out on Friday, February 17th, by MacRumors, and the article basically said that there were parts leaks, and then it goes on to say that MacRumor had somehow obtained one of these iPad 3 displays. It wasn't an active display, but somehow they got it. They didn't say how they got it. And they say they examined it under a microscope in an effort to determine whether it was indeed an ultra-high resolution Retina display. And it was hard to sort of examine it since it wasn't lit up. But then they showed like the two screens at equal magnitude, the iPad 2 and the iPad 3, and they said, they only saw the raw iPad 3 display, but even with the poor lighting, they said they could make out that the pixels were, double the size. That's two. In other words, the iPad 2, the pixels were 2 by 2, and on the iPad 3, 4 by 4. So on the iPad 3, the same cluster was occupied by 16 pixels, exactly twice the resolution in each direction. So it does look like, according to MacRumors, that the iPad 3 will have a full resolution of 2048 by 1536 as compared to the iPad 2's 1024 by 768. I'm just curious, how did MacRumors get this part? Who's leaking this stuff to MacRumors? Anyways, that was the first post. Now, the next day, MacRumors published a post that was based on something published by something called Next Media and Apple Daily, and they claim to have received photos through special channels, end quote, of the back of the new iPad 3. And basically, it showed that the iPad 3 back has a more tapered edge and possibly an 8-megapixel camera on the back. And MacRumors says the shell should look familiar, and basically they're suggesting that the shell in the back is more a gradual taper because maybe the maybe the iPad 3 is a little thicker, and so maybe they make it a little more gradual taper so to create the illusion that it's not as thick. And then they basically say that the camera looks bigger, the camera hole, and that indicates an upgrade to 8 megapixel. MacRumors says, according to Next Media, the new iPad 3 will see a significant upgrade to 8 megapixels. The current back camera for the iPad 2 is only 1 megapixel. So that's another interesting and tantalizing leak as to what is possibly in the iPad 3. Well, on Sunday, that's today, even more parts of the iPad 3 appear to have been leaked, and MacRumors had another story based on a forum post at a Chinese site called Wave iPhone, which offers a photo of what's claimed to be the iPad 3's logic board, showing something called an A5X system on a chip. And basically, the question is, everyone had assumed that the next chip would be the A6 chip. The A4 chip was the initial iPad, and then the A5 chip was on iPad 2. But now they're basically saying that, there's a stamp on the chip, and it indicates that it may be labeled A5X. It says here that there's a date code of 1146 on the A5X chip, indicates that it was manufactured on the 46th week of 2011, which would correspond to the November 14th, 20th week. So it's interesting. Maybe Apple won't go all the way and call it an A6 chip. I mean, I don't really care what they call it as long as it's more powerful. According to the picture, several other features that are also visible on the logic board, including 16 gigabytes of flash memory chips from Hynix and a rectangular Apple-branded chip. And this chip could be corresponding to a power management chips found in iPad teardowns. So, I'm not sure what significance that has other than what the name of the chip is. So maybe Apple's not calling it an A6 chip. But again, who cares? The question is how powerful this A5X chip is. So what do people want in the iPad 3? Well, the New York Post had an article, I guess they got it from USA Today, entitled What Consumers Want in a New iPad. This came out February 19th today. And it says that, shoppers, I guess this is based on the USA Today doing a story. And it says specifically, shoppers want the new iPad to have a USB port to connect the tablet to other devices, that they want faster internet service, a lower price, more memory, and better resolution. And, one person is quoted in the article saying, "What I want is not to have to haul around a 4G mobile hotspot when I'm traveling," somebody named Wolf Butler said in a Facebook comment on USA Today's website. Quote, "Hotel and convention center Wi-Fi are expensive and unusually awful, and 3G is mediocre." So the question is, what will the iPad 3 have, and what do people want? So let's think about that. So, it's a good question. What will the iPad 3 have, and what do consumers want? Now remember, Apple doesn't care what consumers wants. Apple delivers stuff that consumers can't think about what they want, but when it comes out, they want it. That was Steve Jobs' whole thing. Steve Jobs doesn't do what USA Today does. Steve Jobs and Apple didn't go around asking consumers what they want. Instead, Steve Jobs and his people would dream up things that don't exist and are futuristic. And when they come out, people want them. That's what the Macintosh was. That's what the iPhone was. So here's the thing. So one of the people who I correspond with and who listens to this show, he left me a voicemail asking, what features do I think the iPad 3 will have, and will that be enough to get people to buy it? Will, in this tough economy, will only people who've got a lot of money buy it, or will other people get it, and would they want it? So here's the thing. I mean, my guess is, based on what the rumors are and everything that's being said and what I expect, I do think there's going to be a much higher resolution, double the resolution screen. That's a given. It appears that there's enough leaks about it, enough rumors, and Apple's done nothing to sort of put that rumor to bed. So I think we're going to see a much better screen, higher resolution, this double screen. That's a given. I also think that we're going to see a more powerful chip, a more powerful processor, possibly more RAM that goes with it. I think actually the RAM in the iPad 2 is less than 1 gigabyte. and I bet you it gets to at least 1 gigabyte. And the maximum storage right now on the iPad is 64 gigabytes. I think it's possible that Apple will offer a high-end iPad with maybe 128 gigabytes of RAM. But the key is going to be a higher resolution screen, a faster processor, and I bet you the cameras are going to be improved, both on the front and the back. It's possible that there'll be an 8 megapixel camera on the back. So personally, that's enough for me to upgrade from the iPad 2 to the iPad 3, because it's been my experience first with the iPhone and then with the iPad that each iteration of these devices, when you start putting a faster processor or a better camera, the device becomes just much better to use and much more responsive, and you can do much more interesting things. So I do think a lot of people are going to upgrade. Now, there's a lot of people who bought the first iPad and did not upgrade to the iPad 2. So those users, I think a lot of those users are going to upgrade from the original iPad to the iPad 3. And then there's a whole category of people who've been just sitting on the fence from the beginning of the iPad. I know some people like that at work. There's a number of people at work who never were really interested in the iPad, but as they saw their coworkers or their friends first buy the first iPad and then the second iPad, now these fence sitters are ready to commit and to buying the iPad 3. And the iPad 3, having a even more powerful processor and better video processor and video RAM and a much higher resolution screen, it's just going to be a powerful draw. So I do think that the iPad 3 is going to be the biggest selling iPad there is. I mean, the iPad's on a huge growth trajectory since March or April 2010. I think Apple sold 55 million iPads, and the iPad as it becomes more powerful and becomes more useful and becomes even a better replacement for everyday computers. So I think the other thing that it could have, actually there's two other things that it could have, and they somewhat interest me. Actually, it's definitely going to have Siri. I mean, I'd have a side bet with anybody that the iPad 3 will have the beta version of Siri in it, just like the iPhone 4S. I mean, I love Siri on the iPhone 4S. I'm constantly dictating tweets. I'm constantly dictating messages to my wife using the message app. It's just a great tool, the Siri function. And I'm sure it's going to be in the iPad 3. And I bet you Apple turns it on also for the iPad 2. Then there's this whole question of the cell phone data connection. We've seen a lot of stories saying that the next iPad will have 4G data access. And I think it's very possible that Apple will have it. But here's the thing, that no one has seen an FCC application by Apple for 4G yet, and that would be a public document. So some people speculate that Apple will announce the 4G iPad 3 on March 7th, but it won't be available for several months. Now, if you remember the original iPad, the Wi-Fi only version of the iPad went on sale something like a month or two before the iPad 3 with the original iPad with the 3G. So I bet you we're going to have is the same thing. I think the Wi-Fi only version of the iPad 3 is going to be on sale like a couple of weeks a week or 10 days after the March 7th event. And it looks like now that March 7th is when Apple's going to have this event. And then I bet you the 4G version, or the cell phone data version of the iPad 3 doesn't come out till a month or two later. And you'll be able to order it, but you're not going to get it till later. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to buy the Wi-Fi version and also buy the 4G version, and then sell the Wi-Fi version after the 4G version comes. So I guess, to answer the question of the the listener who left me the voicemail, is there going to be enough in the iPad 3 to warrant an upgrade? And I mean, my personal view is absolutely. I mean, having a screen that's got double the pixels, which it really is 4 times the pixels because it's a squared function. I think that screen is just going to be stunning. I think it's going to be night and day difference between looking at the iPad 2 and the iPad 1 on one hand and the iPad 3 on the other. I mean, I think it's just going to be a gorgeous screen. Having that, and also I do think having an 8 megapixel camera is going to be a big upgrade too, because with the iPad 1 and the iPad 2, I see a lot of people, mostly guys. I don't see women doing this as much, but I've seen a lot of guys at events hold up their iPad to record something, whether it's a kids event or some other event. Instead of using their iPhone, a lot of people are using their iPad, because if you have your iPad at some event and you want to take a picture and it's got a camera, why wouldn't you use it? So I guess my advice is absolutely upgrade. And what you should do if you have an iPad 2 or an iPad 1, you should order the iPad 3 and you should put your older iPad on eBay. I've sold my prior iPads on eBay and I've gotten decent money for them. And I think I've recouped anywhere from 50% to 60 or 65% of the cost of upgrading to the new iPad or iPhone by just selling the old version on eBay. So anyways, that's my advice in terms of the future iPad 3 and whether you should buy it. Now, Apple had a gigantic surprise for the world, really, and people who follow Apple. This past Thursday, Apple suddenly released a beta for the next version of the operating system for the Mac, and they have a website that sort of explains what's going to be in the next version of the operating system for the Mac, and they're calling it Mountain Lion. The current version of the operating system for the Mac is called Lion, and they gave a sneak peek to Mountain Lion, and they didn't hold any event. They just announced it on their website, and a week before they met sort of like one-on-one in a hotel room with famous or some prominent bloggers and journalists like John Gruber at Daring Fireball and David Pogue at the New York Times, and basically said, hey, when we go live on the website, you can write your story. And that same day, for developers or anybody who's got a membership in the developer program, you could download the beta of Mountain Lion. Now, why am I talking about this on the iPad podcast? I'm talking about it because I think the main interesting features of Mountain Lion are that Apple took a lot of the standalone apps that Apple has developed for the iPad and the iPhone and put them on the Mac. Specifically, the Reminders app that's on iOS 5 is now on the Mac, is in Mountain Lion. The Messages app that's on the iPhone and iPad that allows you to send iMessages to people who've got iOS 5. You can now send iMessages to anybody on the Mac. So this really sort of unifies the Mac with the devices, the iPhone and the iPad. Also, the notification center that's on iOS 5 on the iPad and iPhone is now on Mountain Lion, as well as standalone notes that's separated from the Mail app, and also full Twitter integration. So Twitter is heavily integrated. And plus now with the Mac, like an iPad or iPhone, you can do AirPlay mirroring from your Mac to a computer. To a big display. And then there's something called share sheets, where like on an iPad or an iPhone, you have that arrow and that you can quickly share stuff. And so now you have that sort of built in also on the website into apps, so you can quickly share them. So for example, they show in the photo booth, they show like what the sharing would be like. And you'll be able to, press an arrow and then send the photo to email, to messages, to Twitter, to AirDrop, to Flickr, to iPhone, add to iPhoto. So, some people think, hey, what's going on is the Mac is going to become more like an iPad. I think what's going on is Apple wants to have some sort of consistency and synergy among devices. And it totally makes sense that, what looks like your messaging app on the Mac would look sort of like what it is on the iPad and the iPhone. The iDevices, the iPhone and the iPad, are far outselling the Mac. And asimco.com had a nice graphic that showed that it took the iPad and the iPhone, just a couple of years to equal all the Macs, that were sold in 22 years or something like that. So, some of the stuff that's going on with Mountain Lion, I think, is going to affect the iPad. One feature, a lot of people haven't talked about this, but I see there's this feature on the Mac where you can, it's called AirDrop. And AirDrop allows you to send by Wi-Fi. If you're on a common Wi-Fi network, one Mac can send a file through AirDrop to another one. And I was thinking, I wouldn't be surprised, since it looks like in Mountain Lion that Apple's expanding like where you see AirDrop. And in Lion, you pretty much only see AirDrop on the side of a Finder window. But in Mountain Lion, you see AirDrop if you right-click on a file or if you use one of these share arrows. But I was thinking, I wouldn't be surprised if Apple creates an AirDrop app for the iPhone and the iPad. Now think about that. Think about how cool that would be. If you had an AirDrop and you had an AirDrop function built into iOS for the iPad and iPhone, think about how cool that would be. If you were on a common Wi-Fi network with a Mac, you could send a file to the AirDrop app from the Mac. And then once it was there, if you clicked on the file, let's say you AirDropped like a Word document or something like that, then you could open it. Similarly, you could send to a Mac through AirDrop. This is just, what I'm hoping for. Now the question is, why would you do that if Apple has iCloud? The difference is this: iCloud basically just works in the background. So if an application is iCloud enabled, like let's say Pages on the iPad or Apple's Pages application on the iPhone, when you save it, it automatically gets saved and goes up to your iCloud account, and there's a version there. And eventually with Mountain Lion, if you have the latest version of Pages, the file will go from your iPad automatically to the Pages app. But that's not going to make every file that you have that's on your Mac or on your iPad go up to the cloud and sync, right? It's going to be only files that are part of apps that have iCloud. And what if you have files on your Mac that are not part of iCloud syncing? And that's where I think Apple should expand AirDrop so that AirDrop allows you to send by Wi-Fi, and I guess eventually by, let's say, 3G or 4G connection to another iDevice. I mean, you could do it by email. Right now, I transfer a lot of files from my Mac to my iDevices by email, but that's kind of clumsy. Wouldn't it be better to just right-click on any file on your Mac and through AirDrop send them to your iDevices? Anyways, so there's a lot to think about in terms of what the future of the Mac is vis-a-vis the iPad and iPhone. I mean, I think for now, Apple is going to keep the Mac alive, but wants the aesthetics of the interface of the Mac to be somewhat similar to the iPad, or somewhat familiar to the iPad user. But we'll see. Now, one of the cool things that Apple did this week, as reported by Cult of Mac, but also as evidenced on their website, is Apple unveiled as sort of a guide on how to make your own iPhone or iPad app. The article in Cult of Mac was Apple teaches you how to make your first App Store app with a new guide. And basically, Apple has posted a new walkthrough called Start Developing iOS Apps Today. And let's see if we can go to it. Let's see where it is. Here's the guide. Okay, let's go. Let's see what it looks like. So it's very cool and simple. Now, developing an app is not an easy thing. It's actually kind of complicated. You got to use Xcode, Apple's developing program. But, what I'm hoping is that one day Apple makes it easy for everyday people who don't know a lot of programming to make their own app for the iPad or iPhone. And I think this is a start. So Apple put this tutorial, Start Developing iOS Apps Today, and it's very simple and straightforward. And basically, if you look at the video version of this, across the top, there are different color codes and sort of a timeline for doing the app. It's divided into sections: Start, Setup, Tutorial, Fundamentals, Development, Next Step. And within that, they have the following topics: Introduction, installing tools, Jump Right In, Tools, Language, Basic Tasks, Frameworks, Design Patterns, Human Interface Design, App Design, App Store, Finding Information, Where to Go from here. And the way it works is you can sort of jump to where you want. Let's say if you want to go to Installing Tools, and it gives you an overview, but then gives you links to more detailed information. So for example, if you go to Jump Right In, it tells you about how to make a great iOS app, and then has a link within that to follow this tutorial now. First, your first iOS app. So it's really done, I think, in a nice way. For language, for example, it talks about Objective-C, which is the programming language that really you need to use to do an iOS app. And at the bottom of the overview post, it gives you a link to an article. Read this article now, write Objective-C code, teaches you the basic syntax of Objective-C. Similarly, for design patterns, Gives you an overview and then says, read this article now, streamline your app with design patterns. So if you go to that more in-depth article, there's just much more information. So, I'm going to try to read all of this. I've been playing around and trying to make an app. The biggest stumbling block for me is that it's been, I never learned C programming language, and so trying to learn Objective-C has been somewhat of a struggle. And I've tried other tools. There are other tools to make iOS apps. These are like these third-party sites. Like you can use PhoneGap, which allows you to use HTML code to make an app. But what Apple's doing here is kind of cool, and I hope they expand on it and ultimately come out with easier tools to make apps. Okay, so one of the more disturbing stories that's been floating around in the past week is something about this company in China that claims to own the rights to the iPad name and is seeking anywhere from $55,000 to $2 billion from Apple. This is based on a story in the Wall Street Journal by Ian Scher, and I've been following this also. And so I'll give you in a nutshell what's going on. Back before the iPad came out, Apple went around the world making sure that the iPad name was purchased by Apple, and Apple did it. They didn't go around and say, hey, we're Apple, highly successful company, please sell us the iPad name because we're coming out with an iPad. What they did is Apple created another company and pretended it was something else and went around and quietly bought up the iPad name. And in China, in Taiwan and Hong Kong, there was a company called ProView, which had the trademark for iPad in, I guess, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and mainland China. And Apple bought it for, I think it was like $80,000 or something like that. Well, the remnants of ProView in mainland China claims that the sale of the iPad name by, the related ProView company didn't cover China, and because it's a subsidiary or something like that. And I mean, this is a crazy claim because the company that sold it to Apple represented that it covered China, and it was the affiliate of ProView, so it's kind of, or the parent company. So it's kind of sleazy, sort of after the fact, say, hey, we didn't really mean to sell it. So a Hong Kong court ruled with Apple, but I guess some lower courts in mainland China have allowed ProView's claim to go forward, and ProView has been going around to different cities asking certain iPad selling outlets to stop selling the iPad. So, I mean, look, this is a shakedown. This is a shakedown by a somewhat, suspect company in China. And one of the disturbing things is that, you don't really know how good the legal system is in China or how corrupt it is. And, whether or not the authorities are going to allow this company to shake down Apple. Now, it is a little weird if you think about it, because the iPad is manufactured in China, and Foxconn, which is a Taiwanese company, employs 1 million people. So you'd think that the government leadership, the communists who are in charge of China, would wouldn't want to jeopardize this gigantic manufacturing plant in China and allow this little company to sort of squeeze Apple. So curious to see what happens, but it is kind of a zany story. Now, in past weeks, I've pointed out that Microsoft has released a large number of apps for the iPad over the last 6 months or so, and it makes me think that at some point Microsoft is going to release an official version of Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Excel for the iPad. And Microsoft actually has released other apps that come from the Microsoft Office suite of programs that run on Windows. But Forbes magazine has an article out entitled Microsoft Office on the iPad, ? Don't hold your breath. And I don't know, I think this article is somewhat suspect. It's by somebody named Eric Savitz, and he writes that he thinks the likelihood of Microsoft Office being on the iPad, he said, it would be awesome if I were the king of France. I would go around saying, Le roi c'est moi. And he goes on to say, anyway, the chances for Office on the iPad look more or less nil. And what's he basing this on? He's basing this on a comment by a financial analyst, someone at Nomura Research named Rick Sherland, who addressed this point in a research note. And he says that while the Office team at Microsoft might be inclined to offer software for the iPad, the company is getting ready to launch Windows 8, which in particular will be targeted at the tablet market. One obvious potential differentiator for Windows tablets is the ability to run Office. So Sherlin writes, don't hold your breath for Office on the iPad. He says, quote, if there were a tug of war of conflicting interest with the Office team on one end of the rope and Steve Sinofsky and Steve Ballmer on the other, chanting Windows, 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 we would expect there would be no Office on iPad anytime soon, end quote. What does this guy know? He's a financial analyst. Now, if he had a brain, he would see that Microsoft has been releasing huge number of Office-related apps on the iPad. I did this last week, I think, but if you go into the iTunes store under iPad and you search for Microsoft, you see a number of Microsoft related apps. Microsoft OneNote, Bing for iPad. Let's see, what is this? What's this? My Xbox Live. Yeah, that's I don't know. Is that? It looks like it's a it's a Microsoft related. The seller is Microsoft. So ask yourself this: why would, if Microsoft really wants to make its apps exclusive to Windows on tablet, Windows 8 on tablet, why would they release so many Microsoft apps already on the iPad? For example, my Xbox Live is a program that works with your Xbox. Now, the Xbox is a really well-selling device for Microsoft. Why doesn't Microsoft make that exclusive with Windows 8? And I think this analyst doesn't know what he's talking about. I am thoroughly convinced that at some point Microsoft will release Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel for the iPad. I mean, there are 55 million iPads. You figure with the iPad 3, there's going to be 100 million iPads out. Now, think about that. If there's 100 million iPads, and let's say it can sell for $100 all those apps, and if you sell 50 million, that's $5 billion worth of revenue. If Microsoft can sell $100 worth of Microsoft Office apps, and I think people would pay that premium, to half of all the iPads that are going to be out there maybe by the end of the year, let's say 50 million. 50 million times $100 is $5 billion. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. So, I don't know. If I was a betting person, I would say, given how many apps Microsoft's already put on the iPad, that there's a good chance that Microsoft's going to have the core apps, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel on the iPad. Now, the other chatter on the internet is that Apple's going to come out with an iPad mini, something smaller than the 10-inch tablet that is the iPad. And ComputerWorld has an article entitled, iPad mini priced at $299 would crush tablet rivals, says analysts. And again, these are financial analysts who I don't think they know much about Apple. But one analyst, is saying that like an 8-inch iPad selling for $300 would crush the opposition. Now, I pointed this out before. The current iPod Touch, which is the size of an iPhone, sells for $200, and the current iPad entry price sells for $500. So where would Apple price a device that was in between in size? I don't know if it'd be 300. I bet you Apple would sell it for 350 or 340 or something like that. So this person's name is Rhoda Alexander, who works at IHS Supply, and says, quote, based on our resources, we're very solid in our belief that Apple will release a small iPad that uses a 7.85-inch display, essentially an 8-inch screen this year, said Alexander. So I do think eventually Apple will come out with a smaller tablet, just to capture some part of the market that it already doesn't have. But I think for now, Apple's going to stick with the 10-inch device. And I don't think on March 7th there's going to be any announcement regarding a small 7-inch or 8-inch device. Apple's selling those iPod Touches very well. Those are the $200 sort of iPhones without a telephone, a 3G access. And as long as they're selling those, it's going to be hard to come out with something that's priced in between. Okay, so the other thing Apple started this past week is a countdown clock on the iTunes Store and on their website to the 25th billion app downloaded through the App Store for an iDevice, whether it's an iPad, iPhone, or iPod Touch. And if you go, there's a counter right now. I'm looking at this. The counter says 24,425,474,000, etc. apps. And when I'm looking at this, basically every second, or even quicker than a second, 1,000 apps are downloaded. And so basically the way the contest works is that they're going to give $10,000 App Store gift card to whoever is the 25th billion app downloaded. So that's kind of exciting. I think now last year they did the same contest for the 10 billionth app downloaded. So this is pretty impressive. And on the site they list what are the top 25 all-time free apps and paid apps. So the number one downloaded paid app is Apple's own Pages. This is for the iPad, the Pages app. And then Angry Birds High Definition, then Angry Birds Season HD, then Penultimate, which is the writing app, then Scrabble for iPad, then Fruit Ninja, then GarageBand, then Goodreader, then Angry Bird Rio HD, then Cut the Rope, then Numbers, then Keynotes, then Words with Friends, and then Starwalk for iPad, which is the astronomy app, then Monopoly for iPad, then Plants vs. Zombies, Where's My Water, Friendly Plus for Facebook, Quick Office Pro HD, which allows you to, use Microsoft Office apps or documents, and then Tetris for iPad, then Notability, which is another stylus writing program, then Splashtop Remote Desktop for iPad, which is a business remote app, and then Pinball HD, and then MyPad Plus for Facebook and Twitter, and finally Infinity Blade. So those are the top 25 paid apps. The free apps are also kind of interesting. The Angry Bird HD Free is number 1. Then the Weather Channel is number 2. Netflix is number 3. Skype is number 4. Kindle is number 5. ABC Player is number 6. Pandora Radio is number 7. Angry Bird Rio HD Free is number 8. CNN app for iPad is number 9. Words with Friends Free is number 10. Google Earth is 11. Calculator Pro is number 12. Fruit Ninja HD Lite is number 13. Calculator for iPad Free is number 14. New York Times for iPad is 15. 16 is USA Today. 17 is Facebook. 18 is MyPad for Facebook and Twitter. 19 is Flipboard, which is a great app. 20 is eBay for iPad. 21 is Angry Birds Season HD free. 22 is Dictionary. 23 is Twitter. 24 is Solitaire. And 25 is Friendly for Facebook. So it's interesting. I have a lot of these apps. And these are all good game apps and good utility apps and good social networking apps. So I don't know who will be the lucky one to win a $10,000 App Store gift card. We'll see. Now there's a whole ecosystem of gadgets and devices to prop up your iPad. And the New York Times, interestingly enough, had an interesting article on how there's all sorts of things to dress up other e-readers in addition to the iPad. For the Kindle, all sorts of stands. For even the iPad, and I've got a link to it, and there's a lot of clever devices for things like the Kindle and for other e-devices. So you might want to check it out by going to the links for the blog post. Okay, so today I stumbled across a great update to one of my favorite jailbreak apps, and that's Display Recorder. And what Display Recorder is, and I've been using it for a couple of years now, Display Recorder is a jailbreak app that allows you to do a video screen record on your iPad or your iPhone. And one of the frustrating things about the iPhone and iPad is that Apple limits what apps can do, and Apple did not allow like a real screen recorder like you have on the computer to be used on the iPhone or iPad, which makes it hard if you want to do a tutorial to show somebody how to use an app on the iPhone or iPad. And so the developer, Ryan Petrick, over the years has, since he released Display Recorder, has upgraded it with all sorts of great features. When it first came out, the files that it did the video recording were AVI files, and from the beginning there was no sound. Like you could just record the screen video but no sound. And then he upgraded at some point so that he could record in H.264, which is a QuickTime format that you could then save to your photo app on the iPad or iPhone. Because when it first came out, Display Recorder, you couldn't save it to your iPad, so then you couldn't really edit it in, let's say, iMovie or like a video editing app. You could just upload it or transfer it. But now they've, Ryan Petrick says, upgraded Display Recorder to version 1.3, and it supports capturing sound in the app as you're screen recording, using the microphone on the iPad or the iPhone. And so it doesn't record sound natively like on a computer, like through the operating system. But you can do interesting things. So with the microphone now, you can narrate as you're doing this screen record. So you can sort of explain like how to use an app and record it as you're using it. Alternatively, if you don't like plug in a headphones into the iPad, but just use the external mic on the iPad, the external mic will pick up the sound coming from the iPad through the speakers. So you could play like a game and record what you're seeing, and it will also record through the mic the sound coming out of the speaker. Now, it's not perfect audio because it's recording, the speaker of the iPad, and it's not, like coming seamlessly in, through the line. But still, it's a major upgrade. And I put on my YouTube feed for MacsFuture a little demo showing me using the microphone. In fact, I recorded the sound through display recording using the microphone. So it's pretty cool. You should check it out. Okay, so one of the strangest articles that I read about, people who are trying to compete with the iPad was in the Boston Globe. There was an article entitled "Guns and Androids, Pakistan's Air Force Making iPads." So apparently Pakistan's military, which is involved in, I guess, a lot of commercial enterprises in Pakistan, that at some plant they have or some base, the Pakistan military is working on making like an iPad competitor, and they call it the PacPad, PACPAD, and it's Android based, and I guess they're gonna try to sell it for $200. So I don't know how good it's gonna be, but it's kind of humorous to think that another country's military is trying to make a cheap version of the iPad using Android. So we'll have to see. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll have these PacPads in the United States. There's an intriguing article, I guess, in the Huffington Post entitled "Parenting by iPad, What Are the Rules?" And the author, Lisa Belkin, I think, was just sort of pointing out the obvious, which is, in the past, parents would give or let kids use it, watch TV or talk on the phone to sort of occupy their time and to, help control the kids. And what Lisa Belkin is now saying is that more and more households are basically given their kids an iPad to play with or to look at, to sort of help parent the kid. And she raises the question, what are the rules regarding that? Now, I have to admit, my kids really like the iDevices, both the iPhone. We have 2 iPhones in our family and 1 iPad. And basically, sometimes they're competing to get the iPad. One will have the iPad, the other one wants to use it. And so I'll hand the iPhone. Mainly, they're using it to play games. Also, the iPad is used a lot by one of my children to watch Netflix movies. A lot of kids' shows are on Netflix. And so it ends up becoming like a sort of a portable television. And my other child likes, we search for interesting YouTube videos. When that child was younger, we used to just search for beautiful waterfalls throughout the world on YouTube on the iPad. We'd also look at beautiful trains running, stuff like that. You can make the iPad be anything for your kids, but more and more I'm starting to use sort of educational apps with my kids. So the rules are the parent has to really control the device. I wouldn't just give a kid an iPad and say, here, keep it in your room and use it whenever you want. It should be, it should be used under the control of the parent. And the same for the, an iPod Touch or iPhone. So there's time to use it, and then there's time to, do your homework or read real books, or read ebooks on the iPad. So she raises a good question. What are the rules? And I think the rules are going to evolve. Now, The Loop had an interesting story showing that the iPad is helping out in schools. TheLoop.com had a story out on February 17th entitled "iPad Improves Kindergartners' Literary Scores." And I guess the head of The Loop is Jim Dalrymple, and he says he spoke with Mike Muir of the Auburn School Department, I guess in Auburn, I think that's Maine. And basically they say they've seen improvements in the kindergarten classes that use the iPad. And basically they're saying that a study was conducted in Auburn, Maine, randomly assigned half of the district's 16 kindergarten classes to use iPads for 9 weeks. And in all, 129 students used an iPad, while 137 were taught without an iPad. And basically, the test results for the classes using the iPads outperformed the non-iPad students in every literacy measure that was tested. And they said, quote, "We are seeing high levels of student motivation, engagement, and learning in the iPad classrooms," said Sue Doris, principal at East Auburn Community School. Quote, "The apps which teach and reinforce fundamental literacy concepts and skills are engaging, interactive, and provide children with immediate feedback. What's more, teachers can customize apps to match the instructional needs of each child, so students are able to learn successfully at their own level and pace." Now, I think the iPad, if used appropriately, could really make school more interesting for kids. If you think about it, the present generation of kids were really raised in a multimedia age, right? With television, and television's not like television 30 years ago. There's all sorts of quick graphics, quick clips. It's very sort of visually intense. And similarly, so is the internet. And so what's great about the iPad is it's visually rich. It's multimedia. And imagine if you're just a kid with regular 2D books. It just seems so dull and straightforward. So I think the iPad with the visuals is sort of speaking the language that kids are sort of used to in everywhere but school. So I do think it's going to make kids more engaged to learn math, let's say, or learn history through multimedia, presentations on the iPad. Okay, so you remember that controversy a couple of weeks ago where, the New York Times and other publications were talking about the poor conditions and the low pay at Foxconn that makes the iPad and the iPhone for Apple in China. Well, word comes out at the end of this week that Foxconn is raising the wages for its Chinese workers by 16 to 25% this month, and it's the third raise since 2010. So it looks like some of the press stories have paid off for the workers in China. Now, it's great that the Chinese are getting wage increases since 2010. The third one would be nice if some American workers could also. Okay, so the website VentureBeat has had a story out about an upcoming app that's coming out this Tuesday that looks very interesting. There's a New York-based startup called Mighty Meeting, and it's got a productivity app coming out for the enterprise, and it's basically a collaboration app for the iPad and Android devices, and I think it's coming out on February 21st, this Tuesday, and it's going to cost $4.99. So, basically, it's going to allow you to collaborate through the iPad with other tablets. And I don't know, it kind of looks interesting. And so keep an eye out for it. It's going to come out this Tuesday, the 21st, and it's called Mighty Teams. So we'll have to see when it comes out exactly what it's like. Okay, so a really cool free app came out this February 13th for the iPad and I guess also the iPhone. It's called WinZip, and it's free, WinZip. And what it does is it's an app that allows you to open zip files that are attached to like the emails that you get. So you can download the zip file. It'll open in WinZip, and then you can use whatever documents that are enclosed in the zip file. And I guess there hasn't been such a great utility. So you can open encrypted zip files. You can view all sorts of documents like TXT documents, doc documents. There's just a wide level of documents that go in zip files. So, it looks like a very handy app, particularly since I don't think there's been many things that open zip files on the iPad. So check it out. It's free, called WinZip. Okay, so finally, if you're looking for a kind of cool looking gaming app, you might want to check out iPairs HD. That's IPAIRS HD, and it's basically a game app for $1.99, which isn't too expensive. And basically, it's like a card game. And it says here, iPairs HD combines tactical elements along with a unique theme set to create a complete new gameplay experience. And it's a modern interpretation of the well-known Pairs Memory Classic card game. So I don't know if you're into this sort of classical iPair game. You might want to check it out. It looks pretty cool for the iPad. It's called iPairs HD, and it's $1.99. Okay, so that's it for episode 90 of the iPad podcast. This is Lex at MacsFuture.com. Remember, this is a chit-chat free podcast about everything about the iPad. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This has been a MacsFuture production.